Hey, what's going on everybody? It's Freaky299 and welcome back to Destiny 2 The Final Shape and a wicked Titan build that I am just so glad to share with you today. Now, this Titan build is fantastic for going into any piece of content, especially in these early days of Final Shape. This build will absolutely wipe the floor with higher tier content like the Expert Mode Nightfalls, even going into the Master Mode Nightfalls. I've been using it in pretty much every piece of content and it has done fantastic at not only providing enough sustain for ourselves and having enough survivability to make it in these higher tier pieces of content, but also massive amounts of damage that you can just nuke yellow bars down into the ground with no sweat. You just have so much uptime on all your abilities, and add to that, you get transference up so quickly with this build that, man, is it just a good time with Prismatic. So without further ado, let's jump into the build. Starting off with the subclass, we have Prismatic, and for our super, we are going to be picking Blade Fury. It's a fantastic roaming super that can clear through waves of adds with no sweat. You can suspend multiple guys, take them down with your improved melee damage, and it's just a lot of fun to use. Of course, there are some other really fun supers in here, but the main reason we're using Blade Fury is 1, because of its damage potential, but 2, because of one of our fragments, Faceted Purpose, which picking up an Orb of Power grants either all of these different buffs, but specifically if you have a Strand super, you get Woven Mail, and Woven Mail is just such a high damage reduction buff that you pretty much want to go into any piece of high content with it on. Now, next up for our class abilities, we have Thruster. I'm a big fan of Thruster, especially when we're using a melee build. It allows you to get out of wizard smoke bubbles and just get out of dangerous areas without tripping up too much. There's a lot of times where you are slowed in this game, especially now more than ever, so being able to just get out of a frozen bubble or out of a wizard bubble is a huge boon. Moving forward, we are taking our melee Frenzied Blade. Frenzied Blade is a fantastic melee. It severs enemies, which reduces their damage output, but mainly it gives us 3 charges of our melee. Now, 3 charges is absolutely fantastic because 1, the more charges you have, the higher your melee regeneration rate is. So as long as you have 1 charge of your melee, you actually have improved melee regen if you're looking to optimize that sort of thing. So Frenzied Blade, fantastic, but it gets even better. Just touching on quickly, we're also using Glacier Grenade. It creates this wall of ice that is fantastic for providing ourselves a little bit of cover. There's many times where we're going in and just dealing so much damage that being able to throw out this wall and just like get some survivability, then break it for insane damage is a huge buff. Currently, there is a bug where Glacier Grenade is not getting destroyed by our consecration, but hopefully once that's fixed, then everything will be just absolutely fantastic. Now, moving on to our aspects, we have Knockout. Knockout makes it so while we're critically wounding a target or breaking their shield, it infuses our melee attacks with arc energy and increases our melee range and damage for a short time. Defeating targets with melee attacks also make us amplified and restore a portion of your health. Defeating more powerful combatants increase the amount of health restored. This is huge because when we're in the middle of combat, just punching a thrall or just punching a small enemy can just save us very quickly, starting that health regen, but also that extra damage just adds on to all of our extra damage from, well, mainly consecration. Consecration is what we are using primarily with this build because the amount of damage it goes off and then having 3 charges from Frenzied Blade means you have no issue slamming your way just through every piece of content. So while we slide, we activate our melee, which launches forward a solar energy wave, and we leap up into the air, which we crash down again and ignite anything that is scorched, which has massive ignition damage. Not only is this buffed by all melee damage in the game, including Knockout, but it also gets increased damage because we are using Facet of Ruin on our fragments, which increase the size and damage burst when we shatter a stasis crystal or frozen target and increases the area effect of solar ignitions. This means that if we throw down a Glacier Grenade and then concentrate into it, The ignition and the shattering does so much damage that you can nuke yellow bars solo so quickly in just any piece of content you're running, especially higher pieces, higher tier of Nightfalls. Now continuing on with our fragments, we're also using Faceted Balance. Rapidly defeating targets with light damage grants melee energy, so every time we're defeating concentration enemies, we are getting that melee energy back. And then rapidly defeating darkness damage grants grenade energy, which again, we are dealing quite a bit of darkness damage, but not as much. This just means that we get our glacier grenade back eventually. Moving forward, we're also taking Faceted Protection. While surrounded by combatants, we are more resistant to incoming damage, and while Transcendent, this effect is increased. Now, this is huge because we're always surrounded, we're always in the middle of combat, so having this on is just a huge buff to us and our survivability. And then lastly, Faceted Sacrifice, which is what allows us to have a near infinite uptime on our Transcendence. While we have an Arc, Solar, or Void buff, ability Final Blows grant bonus Darkness Transcendent energy. Since we're dealing so much damage with our concentration, our light transference energy fills up very quickly, but our darkness does take a bit of extra time. So having Faceted Sacrifice means we get that up even quicker and have transference before we know it. Seeing as we have Knockout, which is granting us Amplified, and then plus from our artifact, we're also getting other light buffs. So there is our subclass. It's absolutely broken, but that's not even touching on what's to come, so let's jump into the weapons. Now, of course, with this build, we are using the main exotic, Monte Carlo. Monte Carlo is a fantastic auto rifle that is absolutely shredding in the game right now. Markov chain increases its damage, and it just absolutely fantastic, especially once you get the catalyst and you just start bayonet stabbing everything. Being able to just take down a couple thrall and have the chance of infinitely or instantly getting back a melee charge means we can concentrate in the middle of a group of enemies, take down a thrall or two, concentrate again, and have our melee going on a near infinite uptime. Monte Carlo is an absolute must-have, and while it doesn't have any artifact synergies right now, it's still a fantastic weapon to use, especially this episode. Now, moving forward from there, there's not really any weapons that you need to worry about having. Personally, I'm a big fan of 1-2 punch shotguns, especially with a build like this, so using something like the Ikelos SG is a fantastic choice because it can also roll with Grave Robber. Other than that, you can actually use any other weapon like trace rifles or sidearms or waveframe grenade launchers because this build already has so much melee damage, and concentration doesn't actually synergize with 1-2 punch, so you don't need to worry about that so much. As well as for our heavy weapon, there's a big thing going on with Overload swords, so make sure to have a sword on handy. I'm a big fan of caster swords as well, and when Overload champions are teleporting all over the place, it means it's a lot easier to actually hit them, so we actually have a number of caster swords that were introduced and have come back into the game, so now's a really good time to pick one up. Now that's going to do it for the weapons. Let's move into the artifact mods. Starting out with the artifact mods, we're grabbing 3 anti-champion perks from the first column. None of these are that important since we're using Monte Carlo as our main primary weapon, but just grab them for whatever secondary weapons you're using. For the second column, we're taking Overcharged Armory, so any of the newer origin trait weapons get overcharged as well as their origin traits get enhanced. Since there are a couple of newer weapons that are worth using, I recommend picking this up, as well as picking up Winning Hand, which just also increases the origin traits of dealer's choice and just has a number of bonus effects for those weapons. Moving into third column, we're taking Elemental Siphon, so rapid final blows with a kinetic weapon like our Monte Carlo create a tangle which matches our super, which is Strand. This is very nice because it allows us to create a tangle in the middle of a group of enemies and get some bonus dark damage off. As well as we're using Overload Sword because again we need overload damage, and we don't really have anything in our build that stuns overloads unless we get our transference, which isn't 100% guarantee, especially in stuff like Grandmaster content where you're not always guaranteed to have the abilities up when you need them. Moving into fourth column now, we're grabbing counter energy, so whenever we stun a champion, we gain energy for our least charged ability, just a very nice bonus thing to have. We're also grabbing Radiant Orb, so while we have Prismatic equipped, picking up an Orb of Power makes us Radiant. This is really huge because allows us to get Radiant and anti-barrier rounds for our auto rifle and for our shotgun and anything we're using. We can also stun Unstoppables because of our Consecration, and because of our Glacier Grenade, so we're not too worried on Unstoppable, but for Radiant, we want to make sure we're spawning enough orbs so we actually get those anti-barrier rounds. And then we're also taking Galvanic Armor, so while we have Prismatic and we're amplified, we take less damage from combatants, which again, we're always amplified because of Knockout. Finally, for fifth column, we're taking Shield Crush, so while we have Woven Mail, our melee charges are faster and deal increased damage, and while we're amplified, we deal increased grenade damage and it recharges faster. Again, we have both of these buffs up near permanently, so we don't need to worry about actually keeping them up, and we just get these buffs pretty much all the time. Finally, for fifth column, we're taking Transference, so we gain increased grenade and melee damage while Transcendent, and Weapon Final Blows while Transcendent refund light and dark energy. We get our Transference energy so quickly, so again, having this extra buff just means that we have near infinite uptime on that actual Transcendence buff. This build just goes absolutely insane, and the artifact mod makes it that much better. But of course, let's move on to those armor mods. Starting out with the helmet, we're taking Hands On, so we gain bonus super energy on melee kills. We pretty much have Blade Fury up all the time because of this and all the concentration takedowns we're getting. We also use Kinetic Siphon, so when we get to rapid final blows with our Monte Carlo, we spawn an Orb of Power. Getting as many Orbs of Power as important as possible, so having this is just really nice. And then of course Heavy Ammo Finder, so while we defeat enemies with our primary weapon, we have an increased chance of dropping heavy ammo. We always want to make sure we have heavy ammo, especially for our sword if we're dealing with overload champions. Now for stats, of course Prismatic is huge for the stat department, but of course you want to focus Resilience for tier 100 Resilience. You want that 30% damage reduction, and you want as low as cooldown on your class ability, which we're using Thruster. Second, we want Discipline at as high as possible so we can constantly throw grenades. It's huge that we get our actual Transcendent Grenade back when we're using it, so having Discipline as high as possible is huge, as well as we have ways of getting our melee energy back so we don't need to worry about that being as high. But of course, if you can get your strength stat to 100, that is huge, because again, all these abilities just fuel into each other and we end up just steamrolling any piece of content that we step into. Down to our exotic, we are using the exotic gauntlet Synthoceps, which of course come with the exotic perk Biotic enhancements. While we're surrounded, we gain increased melee and super damage, as well as improved weapon handling and reload speed. Now of course, Synthoceps are an absolute staple for any Titan, and they are just amazing with this build. It means you can go in, your knockout punches are that much better, but also your Consecration gets absolutely insane damage. Pyro Gale is a lot of fun, but from experience, Synthoceps are going to serve you a lot better. And then of course, if you are doing the dual destiny and you have got an exotic class item that drops with Synthoceps and some other exotic, that is absolutely fantastic. The only thing you're missing out on from using the exotic class item is you're missing the super damage increase. That super damage increase on something like Blade Fury is really big, so again, I like using Synthoceps personally, but those exotic class items can also have some big buffs to them if you get the right roll. Moving on to the actual mods, we're using Impact Induction, so causing damage with the powered melee attack, reduce our grenade cooldown, as well as Momentum Transfer, so causing damage with the grenade reduces our melee cooldown. Just a little synergy, so whenever we're using our Glacier Grenade, we can actually pop it individually and slowly, so we get multiple procs of our Momentum Transfer and our Impact Induction. And then we're also using heavy-handeds because all of the melee takedowns we're getting, we want to be spawning Orbs of Power with. Down to the chest piece, we are always taking a double elemental resist to match whatever the current threat modifier is. So if you're dealing with void threat, you want to use double void threat along with a single elemental resist to combat any secondary damage type. Usually it's in your best interest not to stack up 3 elemental damage resistance and instead spread yourself across 2. If you do have the energy for something like a concussive dampener or a melee damage resistance, that's also very huge. But again, double to match the current threat modifier, and then just a single for whatever secondary damage type you find you have trouble with. Down to the boots, we're taking double kinetic weapon surge, so our Monte Carlo has increased damage while we have armor charges. This is really nice, as especially getting into higher pieces of content, our primary weapons can lose a bit of functionality because enemies are just so tanky. Having ×5 Markov chain along with kinetic weapon surge ×2 means we have such a high damage output with Monte Carlo that we're actually taking down enemies and we're actually spawning those orbs of power from our kinetic siphon. Along with that, we're taking recuperation, so every time we pick up an orb of power, we're getting a little burst of health. Now recuperation is fantastic because just running around, finding a little orb of power, picking it up and it saving you is big, but another big thing with this is that because we have heavy-handed, if we take down an enemy with a melee attack, they're going to spawn an orb of power, and if we are punching that enemy, we immediately pick up the orb of power, granting us the recuperation. This plus knockout means that we get a huge burst of health and health regeneration at the same time, allowing us to survive even much more in the fight. So if you're ever in the middle of a battle and you think you're going to go down, just try and start punching enemies and see if you can get those orbs of power to make your getaway a little bit easier. And down to the class item, we're taking Outreach, so whenever we use our thruster, we get a little burst of melee energy, along with double Font of Restoration, so we have a +50 in recovery while we have an armor charge. This is really nice, as whenever we are in the middle of battle, we want that recovery to be as high as possible, because having our health delay be really long means it takes us longer to actually get back into the fight, and means we're relying a lot more on knockout, which again, we can't always do, especially with flying enemies like wizards or shriekers. And that is going to do it for the build. Now, this has been a wonderful build that I've been using for the past while in these first number of weeks and days of TheFinalShape. It's something I've been using in the raid, it's something I've been using in expert and master content, and it's just absolutely wonderful to go in, absolutely slay out a majority of the enemies, and finish every piece of content you're in with high orbs created and high takedowns. Monte Carlo puts in fantastic work, and being able to swap out any other weapon in your slot for the energy or power weapons means it's really versatile in whatever you want to do. And again, if you want to swap out Monte Carlo for something that has Pugilist or something like that, you can do that. This build is very versatile with its weapon choices, just because the artifact, the exotic, and prismatic are so locked in that you can just crush any piece of content you step in with, and then Monte Carlo ensures that you're constantly getting consecration procs off. Now, of course, if you want a picture of the build, there's going to be one on screen along with a dim link in the description below for easy copying. And, well, thank you everybody so much for watching. Be sure to hit a subscribe to see more build videos, along with a like if you enjoyed this one. Leave a comment if you have anything to say, and I'll try to respond as much as I can. And, well, I've been FreakyDude99. Thank you again so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Peace out.